Hello everyone, welcome back. And today we'll be continuing with our classes of creative writing. And today we'll be exploring a new topic. And this is the most important part of creative writing. So let's start. So our topic for the day is plot. A plot, a story's plot is what happens in the story and the order it happens in. Um, for there to be a story, something has to move to change. Something has to move from point A to point B. So your story starts from point A, and point A is the starting. It's how you the beginning of the story, and point B is your climax, and it's the end of your story, the end result. And your plot is how you move from point A to point B, how you move from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. And you move from point A to point B because of a certain change. You don't move just for the sake of moving. You have to have a reason, and these reasons are mostly changes. Now here we have a list of a few most common changes that can occur. These are not the only changes which can occur in a story, but these are the most common ones. And let's take the first one. The first one says a physical event. Now, physical event means events that are actually happening in real life. So from point A is a killer is picking off everyone in town. So there we are introduced to a killer who is killing off people in the town one by one. And that's the beginning of a story. And point B, that is the end of a story, should be that the police arrests the killer. So your plot will be how the killer gets arrested and how the killer stops killing people. And this journey is what your plot and what your story will be based upon. The next change that we have is a decision. This is not a physical event, it's not movement, but it's a state of mind. And a point A is the character wants to practice law like his father. So your main character wants to be a lawyer, and that's the beginning of the story. Then point B is that the character decides to be a ballet dancer. Now your plot or your journey would be if she wanted or he wanted to be a lawyer, then why did he change his mind and become a ballet dancer? Or maybe he wanted a lawyer just to please his father, but then he realizes that what he actually wants is to dance. So this journey will be your plot. The next change that we have is a change in a relationship. These are usually romance stories, and let's say point A is they hate each other. So your two characters hate each other, and point B they fall in love. Again, the plot will be the journey from hating to loving. The next change we have is a change in a person. So this is change in the personality. Here, point A, we have character is selfish. Point B, we have character has learned to be less selfish. So he's undergone some changes. He's undergone maybe some events have happened that make him realize that, oh, I shouldn't be so selfish and I should help others more and care about others more. And that will be your plot. Okay, so the last change that we have here is change in the reader's understanding of a situation. Now, this is a little tricky to understand, but I'm, let's see with an example. So point A is character appears to be a murderer. So when you read the book, it looks like that this character is the killer, and you're convinced he's the killer. But by the time you reach the end of the book, you realize that the character is actually innocent. So this is a change in your perception. The book was always the same. The character was never the killer, but it was you who changed your mind. So it was you who first thought that the character was a killer, and you realized by the end of the book that no, he wasn't. So it's a change in your mind, and this is also um, a it is also a journey uh, that the writer has to write very carefully for his readers to be able to transition from point A to point B. Nothing happens until something moves. The main reason behind a story happening or a plot forming is that something has to move. Something moves from point A to point B. And at the end of a lot of stories, there's this line, and they lived happily ever after. Now, happily ever after comes at the story's end. It means nothing else is happening. It means that the writer does not have any more stories to tell, and at least for the time being, the writer has decided that this story must end. It means that there is no more drama, there's no more conflict, there's no more change. And if we take the example of Cinderella, so at the end of that book also it's written Cinderella and Prince Charming live happily ever after. Now what happens after happily ever after? Okay, they get married, but then what? So it's not like as if that it ceases to exist. Cinderella and Prince Charming just they live a normal life after that, and they wake up late, they eat a nice breakfast, they take a walk, but there's no more drama happening. And there's nothing interesting happening in their lives, which is worth writing about. So the story ends there. However, now if you see, if it would be different if the writer had ended the book with happily ever after, except for one affair and its violent ending. So maybe once they got married and they lived their normal lives, maybe after 4 or 5 years, Prince Charming has an affair with another princess, and Cinderella finds out. She gets angry, and then she maybe she can't take it anymore, and she fights with the princess, with the girl that prince is having an affair with. And anyway, so that's something that's worth telling about. It's interesting, it's drama. So it means that there is one more plot there. You can write about it, and it does not end. The story does not end, and the writer can continue on with the story. Or it could also be happily ever after until Cinderella discovered Prince Charming's secret dungeon. So one day after their marriage, Cinderella is roaming around in the castle, and then she decides to go into the basement. And when she goes into the basement, she sees this dungeon, and inside the dungeon, she sees that Charming is torturing someone, and she realizes that maybe Prince Charming isn't the good guy she thought him to be, and she realizes that she cannot stay married to him anymore. So maybe she gets a divorce. Maybe she decides that she'll still love Prince Charming. Who knows? But the point is that it's not happily ever after then. It's not the end of the story. Something happened, something worth telling about, something worth writing about, and we get a plot. However, if you end the book with just happily ever after, then that means the book is ending and there's nothing more to tell. So, what I'm trying to say here is that you need to have drama, you need to have something interesting happen for the story to have a plot. You cannot just write about normal life and the normal things that happen with everyone, because then it's not interesting. It's not something the reader would be interested in reading. So you have to come up with something that's more than just the ordinary. And I've highlighted here, the story is how you get to the happy ending or how it turns sour. So the story is the journey that you take to get to the happy ending, or maybe the sad ending, your choice. But it's the story, or the plot is the journey. And then it says narrative conflict is what makes stories happen. Narrative conflict is just a fancy word for drama. So drama is what makes stories happen. This can be, again, we have a few examples here. A conflict, that's an argument between characters. Now this could be Prince Charming's ex-girlfriend decides to break up the marriage. Why not? Or a character's internal conflict. So this means that the state of mind that they married in is not the same is not the same anymore, and they want something else now. So Cinderella develops a drinking problem. So now she's developed a drinking problem, and she is the princess of her kingdom. How will she manage a kingdom if she has a drinking problem? Drama. Drama equals story. We have a story here. Or it could also be a conflict between characters and an impersonal force. So conflict, that is an argument between characters, so and an impersonal force. So it's an argument or between character and something which is not human. So this could be floods, disease, dragons. So again, we have drama. If there is a flood in the kingdom, then how does Cinderella decide to save her kingdom? Or if there's a disease spreading around, what does she do? Or if a dragon decides to come and visit her town and visit her kingdom, how will she protect her kingdom? These are all examples of drama and things which make the story interesting. So you have to keep in mind that the story should never become dull, and it should always be kept interesting. Otherwise, the reader will lose interest and stop reading your book or your short story. So if your characters are getting comfortable too early in the story, which means if your characters are getting very normal and there's no more conflict, there's no more argument very early in the story, then it means you have to come up with more drama. Now, how to stir up major trouble or how to come up with drama? How do you come up with an interesting conflict for your story? It's often a good idea to start with your main character. Since your plot is, as I've already told this to you before, your protagonist or your main character, his actions have a huge impact on how your story goes and how your plot is formed. The character's personality and character sketch and the actions they take form the plot of the story. So if you want to come up with drama for your plot, then you have to base it, then you have to study the character sketch of your main character, and that's how you decide what kind of major trouble or conflict or argument you can use. So the next point that I've introduced here are a couple of questions that you can ask yourself, and these questions will help you frame drama. Let's see. The first question is, what's something this character desperately wants? So your main conflict could be on something that the character, your main protagonist, wants, but he or she cannot get it. And that could be your point A, that the character does not have the desired object, And your point B in the story, that's the end of the story, is that the character finally gets what she has always wanted in her life. And you show this journey between point A to point B. Or you also could ask yourself the question, what difficulties might get in the way? So this journey has to have some difficulties. And then whatever your conflict is, you have to see what kind of difficulties could come in the way, what could happen wrong, what could go wrong. And then what would force this character to do something he or she is really uncomfortable with. So maybe your main character hates doing something, hates giving speeches maybe. Okay, so if your main character hates giving speeches and is afraid of giving speeches, so what will happen that will force your main character to give speeches and overcome this fear? So maybe giving speech is the only way he or she could save his business. So they decide that um, their business means very much to them and they love their business, and even if they have to give a speech, they will, because it means saving the business. And saving the business forces them to give a speech. So you have to think what could force this character to do something he or she is really uncomfortable with, and this in turn will help them overcome their fears. Something he or she doesn't feel capable of doing. Again, this is if someone is underconfident, if someone is insecure, if your main character does not feel confident enough of doing a thing, then you have to develop the plot in a way that it makes them more capable, it makes them more confident in themselves. So you have to turn your character into a dynamic character. And as we studied before, dynamic characters change from the life mistakes and all their life journey. And you have to plot a life journey in such a way that these characters change for good and not for bad. So again, I've highlighted it here. Character development has a direct impact. You have to remember that plot and characters go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. So, a really good character sketch is necessary to make a really good plot. Next, so drawing your roadmap. Okay, so you've invented characters and you've planned a conflict or an argument that will get them off their sofa and doing something interesting. Now, how do you organize your story? So you have the basics in mind. This is my character and this is my point A in the story and this is my point B. And this is the trouble that I'm going to cause in the story. Now, how do you plan your story? For this, we have a roadmap. So a traditional way to structure your story is using the Freytag's pyramid. There are a lot of other ways also, but this is the most common and most accepted way of structuring a story. So the pyramid consists of a few steps, and while it may look complicated, once you understand it, it's fairly very simple. But just follow me here. So we start the pyramid with the exposition. Exposition is used to refer to the point where we meet the characters, and you introduce the characters and you introduce the setting, and basically you introduce your story to the reader. That's called exposition. Then we have the inciting incident. The inciting incident would be used to call this point here. This point will be used to refer to the inciting incident. Then the inciting incident is an action which leads to the rising action. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll explain it to you later in detail. just right now look at the structure: exposition, inciting incident, then the rising action, which is the narrative and dramatic tension build. This basically refers to you when the writer tries to move to the climax and he has to have a backstory and explain how he got to the climax. So that build up is called rising action. Then we have the climax. Climax is the major point. It's when all hell breaks loose or when the real event happens, the major breakthrough happens. That's called climax. And after climax, we have the falling action, which is just what happens after climax, what are the results of climax, now what will happen. And after the falling action, we have the resolution, that is, you complete the story, you give it a finishing. I'll explain it to you all in detail. This is just the basic structure which you can use to structure your story. So as we saw in the pyramid, the first point was exposition. Now what is exposition? The exposition is simply the beginning of a story in which the author sets the stage for the events to come. You introduce the main characters, the setting, and the plot allows the reader to understand the main context of the story. So as I said, this is the introduction of the story. That's it. The introduction of the story is what we use to refer exposition. So here we are comparing the exposition to a roller coaster ride. Just like in the beginning, when you're just entering the roller coaster and you're sitting down and people are walking around making sure your seat belt is buckled and you are roped in tightly, and just seeing that if everyone is safe, and you're feeling really excited, but at the same time you're also feeling a little bit scared before the ride's about to start, and there's a lot of unknown at the point. You don't know what's about to happen. So just like the beginning of the roller coaster, the exposition is the beginning of a story. So the next point that we had on our Freytag experiment was the inciting incident. Now the inciting incident is a singular event or a single action that kicks off the story and leads to the major conflict of the novel. So the inciting incident is one major event or one major action that causes the story to happen, to begin. So once you've introduced the characters, you need to come up with an event that will cause your story to happen. So probably the main character. Suppose you have this main character and her father dies, and her father dies in the military. So that will be the inciting incident, that her father dies in the military. Now that inciting, if we call that the inciting incident, then that means that has what has caused the entire story to happen. Now how has that caused the entire story to happen? It could be that because her father died in the military, that she herself, the major character herself, decides to go to Iraq and join the military there. So it's this event, it's her father's death that forces her, that makes her go to Iran and join the army. And maybe your story continues in Iran and what happened there, and your major accidents or your major incidents happen in Iran. But the event which caused the story to happen here was her father's death, and that is called the inciting incident. The incident which causes the story to happen. It's not the major conflict of the story, but it's what causes the major conflict to happen. And once the inciting incident has happened, then you have the rising action. The rising action is in which the story continues to build and eventually comes to a point where the main character might have to take a drastic action or might miss an opportunity to do this. The revelation of the inciting incident and the rising action result in events that may alter the future in unchangeable ways. So once your inciting incident has happened, if we take the same example of the father dying, then your rising action will be her journey to Iran and how she becomes a part of the military and her training and basically everything that leads up to the major conflict. So her entire training, her journey will be called your rising action. And after the rising action, we have the climax at the top of the pyramid here. So we have exposition, that is you begin the story. Then we have the inciting incident where you describe the cause or what has led to the story happening. Then you have the rising action. In rising action, you describe the journey which leads to the major conflict, what has happened that will cause the conflict. And at the top of the pyramid, you have the conflict or the climax. The climax is the point of no return in any story. The climax is an event that changes the course of a story for better or worse. It often changes the characters and can set off a chain reaction of events. The point where the tension reaches its highest peak and the fate of the protagonist is revealed. This is the make it or break it moment for the protagonist where he has to overcome the most difficult obstacle by far. So this is the peak of your pyramid, and it's where the major conflict of your story happens. Once the major conflict has happened, then like any other conflict, there has to be consequences and there have to be results. So once the conflict has happened, you describe what will happen after the conflict to the characters. How have their lives changed? How have they altered? What will happen now? The result. That's what's called tying it up. The falling action of a story is the fallout that comes as a result of the climax. In Romeo and Juliet, the falling action is so dramatic, the tragic suicides of the young lovers, and this famous tragic scene is the result of events triggered in the duel of the climax. So I don't know how many of you know Romeo and Juliet's story, but basically what happens at the end is that because of this duel, that's the climax of their story, they both decide to commit suicide. And it's very tragic, and both these characters who are in love with each other, they decide that that they're going to die. So, and that is our falling action because it's the result of the climax. So the result of the climax is called the falling action. And once you've described the falling action, the only thing left for you in the story is to end it up, to round it up, and to finish it. So that finishing the story is called the plot's resolution. Now it's not necessary that the plot's resolution is always happily ever after. The resolution shows how the character responds to the events. So it's up to you if you want a good resolution or if you want the resolution to go in a bad way. For example, you can take Romeo and Juliet. They did not have a happy ending. They both died. So you can also go that way. It's your choice. And this is where our pyramid completes and Freytag's pyramid is complete. Now, there might be still a lot of doubts in your mind about how this pyramid exactly works. So I'm going to take a classic example and explain it to you through that. So we're going to take Cinderella, and I'm going to break down the entire story, and we'll look how it fits the Freytag's pyramid, and maybe you'll understand it better using an example. So the exposition or the beginning of the story in Cinderella is that the Cinderella's mother died and she now lives with her father, stepmother, and stepsisters. So when we're introduced to the story, first it's how Cinderella's mother was this wonderful person, but she died, and um, then her father decided to remarry, and we are introduced to her horrible stepmother and stepsisters. So that is the beginning of the story. You are introduced to every character and you're introduced to the setting. So that is called the exposition. The next point is the inciting incident. The inciting incident in Cinderella's story was that the king decides to throw a ball, and to which all the young girls in the country are invited, so in order that the prince might choose a bride. So this is the inciting incident, that the king decides to invite every young girl to the ball. Now, why is this the inciting incident? As I told you before, inciting incident is one that causes your story to happen. So this is what caused your story to happen. If she had never got the invitation, if the king had decided not to throw a ball, then Cinderella would have maybe never met Prince and her fairy godmother, and she would still be with her stepsisters, just slaving away. So our story might never have happened if the ball hadn't been thrown. And so this is what is our inciting incident here, since it has caused the entire story. The third point we have is the rising action. So the rising action, as I said, is her journey towards the climax. It's how she goes from the inciting incident to the climax. So our inciting incident was that Cinderella learns of the ball. Cinderella hears about the ball that the king has decided to throw, and she wants to go to the ball, and also her stepmother and stepsisters want to go to the ball. So a rising action will be, how does she go to the ball? What all hardships she faced? So no matter what Cinderella does, she is still unable to go to the ball, even after she made her own dress, which her stepmother tore. But then she finally meets her fairy godmother, who gives her a carriage, a new dress, horses, and everything. So that is our rising action. It's how she tries very hard to make this dress on her own and complete all the chores on the time so that she can go to the ball. But in the end, her stepsisters and stepmother just ruin her dress completely, and they tear it off, as we can see it in the picture here. But then she meets her fairy godmother, who says that she will help her, and this fairy godmother provides her with these beautiful glass slippers and a carriage and a dress, and basically helps her to go to the ball. So and then this is a rising action. After the rising action, we will have the climax. Now the climax is the ball itself. The ball will be a climax. It's where the prince and Cinderella meet, and they fall in love there, but she runs away because she has a 12 o'clock deadline, and she leaves behind one glass slipper. And this will be a climax. It's the major event that happened. It's the major conflict of the story. So this is our climax, and in the end, Cinderella left the glass slipper. So next we have the falling action. In falling action, we define what the result of the story of the climax was. So in Cinderella, the climax was that she went to the ball, she fell in love, and then she ran away and left behind her glass slipper. So what is the result of that? The result was that the prince goes around looking for her, and his men, they go around and try to find someone to whom the shoe fits. So that is a following action, that how they are looking for Cinderella, and then they finally find her and see that the glass slipper fits, and how her stepmother and stepsisters were still trying to sabotage her, but they failed, and Prince finally found Cinderella. So that is the result of a climax and will be called the falling action. Now, the story is almost done. All that was needed was a kind of tie up to the story, a kind of what we call the end. So here, the resolution is that Cinderella and the prince got married and they lived happily ever after. So it's a happy ending and it completes the story. And that's what the resolution is. It completes the story, it gives an ending to the story. And so that's it. The example's finished. And I hope this example made it more clear to you about how you can use the Freytag's pyramid for a story, and you understood the usage and the importance of it. So here is the activity of the day. So I want you to watch one of your favorite movies, and then you have to answer the following questions. You can do this while you're watching the movie, so that because when you're watching the movie, you're more engrossed and you'll remember details. Or do it just after watching the movie, so you remember and you can answer the questions correctly. The first question is, what did the author need to explain to viewers in the exposition section? What background information was given for this show or the movie? So I want you to just write a little bit about the exposition of the movie or the show that you're watching, how the writer introduced the characters, the plot, the setting. And moving on, the second question is, what inciting event or what inciting incident causes the action to begin to rise? So what was the inciting incident here? What caused the story, what caused the movie to happen? Then where does the story peak? Is there a clear climax? What events lead up to the conclusion? How is the story resolved? So basically what I want you to do is, these questions are just a word format of the pyramid. So what I want you to do is, I want you to make a Freytag's pyramid of any movie or any show of your choice. I want you to watch it, and then I want you to make a Freytag's pyramid and write what the inciting incident, what the climax, what the rising action, falling action, resolution, exposition. I want you to define all these in your Freytag's pyramid. Now, maybe once, if you watch it once, you will not get it. So you can watch the movie twice or thrice, and I'm sure you'll understand what the beginning of the story is, what the ending is, what the climax is. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to make you understand the concept, and once even though I've explained it to you through an example, if you take up an example by yourself and you do it yourself, it'll become more clear to you and you'll be able to use this much better. So that's it for the day. I hope you're all well, and goodbye until next time.